Nathan Caldwell stood in his penthouse, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline. The invitation in his hand felt heavier than it should have. It was from Victoria Harrington, the woman he had once believed he would spend the rest of his life with. But instead, she had left him for another man, a safer choice, a man who fit the mold of her family's expectations. And now, as if to rub salt into the wound, she had sent him a wedding invitation. Nathan exhaled sharply, tossing the envelope onto the marble counter. He refused to give her the satisfaction of thinking he cared, but he needed to prove a point. His best friend, Daniel Reeves, smirked from across the room, casually swirling his whiskey. "You look like you're about to set that thing on fire." "Maybe I should," Nathan muttered. "Or," Daniel leaned forward with a knowing glint in his eye, "you could show up with someone unexpected. Let her see that you've moved on." Nathan arched a brow. "Who would I take?" Daniel shrugged. "You're a billionaire. Women practically throw themselves at you." Nathan shook his head. That wasn't what he wanted. If he showed up with some predictable socialite, Victoria would see right through it. He needed a wild card. That was when he saw her. Through the massive glass windows, down on the bustling street below, a woman sat alone on the sidewalk. She was bundled in a tattered coat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if shielding from the cold. Unlike the other panhandlers, she didn't have a sign, nor did she beg. She simply sat there, staring at the world with a defiant kind of strength. Nathan's curiosity piqued. "Daniel," he said slowly, his mind spinning with the beginnings of an idea, "I think I just found my date." The city air was crisp as Nathan stepped outside, crossing the street toward the woman. As he approached, she didn't flinch, didn't shrink away. Instead, she turned to him, meeting his gaze head on. Her eyes were striking, a piercing shade of green, but dulled with exhaustion. "You need something?" she asked, her voice carrying a rough edge, as if she was used to people passing judgment on her. Nathan slipped his hands into his coat pockets, studying her. "What's your name?" She snorted, shaking her head. "Rich guy like you doesn't need my name. Just toss your spare change and move on." A smirk tugged at the corner of Nathan's lips. "What if I told you I have a proposition for you?" She narrowed her eyes, wary. "I don't do that kind of work." His smirk widened. "It's not what you're thinking. I need a date to a wedding. Someone unexpected. Someone who will leave an impression." She stared at him for a long moment before bursting into laughter, a real, unapologetic laugh. "Oh, this is rich," she said. "You want to turn me into your Cinderella, dress me up, parade me around, make some ex jealous?" Nathan didn't deny it. "Something like that." She crossed her arms. "And what's in it for me?" $100,000, he said easily. That got her attention. Her lips parted slightly, but she recovered quickly, masking her reaction. "I don't trust rich men with easy money," she said bluntly. Nathan admired her directness. "Then let's make it official. A contract. You come with me, behave for one night, and after that, you never have to see me again." She considered him, her green eyes scanning his face, searching for deception. Finally, she sighed. "All right, Mr. Moneybags. You got yourself a deal." Nathan extended his hand. "And your name?" For the first time, she hesitated. Then, she squared her shoulders. "Eleanor Pierce." Their hands met in a firm shake. Neither of them knew it yet, but this deal was about to change both of their lives forever. Nathan led Eleanor into his sleek black car, watching her out of the corner of his eye as she settled into the plush leather seat. She didn't fidget or gawk at the luxury like most people would. Instead, she simply exhaled and stared out the window, her expression unreadable. There was no awe, no excitement, just quiet acceptance, as if this was just another part of her unpredictable life. That intrigued him. "You don't seem surprised," he remarked, adjusting his cufflinks. Eleanor turned to him, a smirk tugging at her lips. "I've seen enough of this world to know that money doesn't impress me. People do." Nathan arched a brow, interested. "And what kind of people impress you?" She shrugged. "The kind who don't throw their money around to solve their problems." That was a direct hit, and Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. She was quick, sharper than he expected. Most people were too intimidated to challenge him, but she had no fear. "I assume that was aimed at me?" She gave him an innocent look. "Did it feel like it was?" Nathan didn't answer. He simply tapped the driver's partition, signaling him to take them to their next stop, a high-end boutique where Eleanor would get fitted for the wedding. The car pulled up in front of an elegant glass building, its golden sign glimmering under the streetlights. Eleanor eyed it warily. "This place looks expensive," she muttered. "That's the point," Nathan replied, stepping out and holding the door open for her. She hesitated for half a second before sighing and following him inside. Immediately, a team of stylists swarmed them, their polished smiles trained on Nathan. "Mr. Caldwell, always a pleasure," a middle-aged woman in a sleek black dress greeted. "How can we assist you this evening?" Nathan gestured toward Eleanor. "She needs everything, a full transformation." Eleanor stiffened slightly, but didn't protest. The stylist looked her up and down with a critical eye, her professional smile never faltering. "I see. We'll take good care of her." Eleanor leaned in closer to Nathan and whispered, "If this involves waxing, I'm out." He laughed. "Just a dress. Maybe some shoes if you're lucky." She rolled her eyes, but let the stylist lead her toward the fitting rooms. Nathan watched as Eleanor disappeared behind the curtains, and for a moment he wondered if this was a mistake. He had chosen her on impulse, drawn to something in her that he couldn't quite explain. But was she really the right person for this? He shook the thought away. It didn't matter. He just needed to get through the wedding, and then this arrangement would be over. After what felt like an eternity, the stylist finally called for him. "Mr. Caldwell, she's ready." Nathan stood, straightening his suit before walking toward the fitting area. The moment he saw her, he froze. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, wearing a deep emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly. The color brought out the sharpness of her green eyes, and for the first time, she looked as if she belonged in this world. The stylist had softened her unruly hair into sleek waves that cascaded over her shoulders, and light makeup accentuated her features without changing who she was. But what struck him most wasn't the dress or the transformation. It was the way she looked at herself in the mirror. Not with shock, not with disbelief, but with familiarity. As if this wasn't new to her at all. Nathan took a step closer. "You've done this before." Eleanor met his gaze through the mirror. "What makes you say that?" He studied her, his mind turning. "You don't look surprised. Most people would react differently." She turned to face him fully, a small smile playing on her lips. "Maybe I just have a good poker face." Nathan narrowed his eyes. There was something about her, something she wasn't saying. But before he could press further, she twirled in place, letting the dress flow around her. "Well, rich boy," she said with a teasing edge, "do I pass the test?" Nathan smirked. "You'll do." She mock curtsied. "How charming." The stylist clapped her hands, stepping forward. "She looks perfect, Mr. Caldwell. We'll have the dress sent to your residence, along with the shoes and accessories." "Good," Nathan said, pulling out his card and handing it over. As the payment was processed, Eleanor leaned in again. "You didn't even check the price." "I don't need to," he replied smoothly. "I get what I want." She tilted her head. "And what do you want exactly?" Nathan hesitated for a brief moment before answering. "For you to play your part." Eleanor held his gaze for a second longer before stepping back. "Then I guess we both get what we want." Nathan didn't respond. Instead, he simply turned and gestured for her to follow. As they walked back to the car, he glanced at her one last time, still trying to piece together the puzzle of who she really was, because something told him this was just the beginning. And Eleanor Pierce was full of secrets. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the soft hum of the city outside her window. The bed beneath her was far too comfortable, the sheets impossibly soft. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The boutique, the expensive dress, the way Nathan Caldwell had looked at her, as if he knew she was hiding something. She sighed and pushed herself up, stretching her arms above her head before sliding out of bed. The hotel suite Nathan had put her in was absurdly luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline, and every piece of furniture was meticulously chosen for elegance rather than comfort. It was a world away from where she had been just yesterday, sitting on the cold pavement, counting the coins in her cup. But she wasn't overwhelmed, not even close. She wandered into the bathroom, taking in the gleaming marble and gold fixtures. A silk robe had been left neatly folded on the counter, and when she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she hesitated. The transformation was still there. Her hair still smooth, her skin still glowing from the subtle touch of the stylist's work. This wasn't new. She reached out, tracing the reflection with her fingers before shaking her head and turning away. None of this mattered. She just needed to get through this arrangement with Nathan, take her money, and move on. A sharp knock on the door made her pause. "Eleanor," Nathan's voice came through, steady and commanding. "Breakfast." She sighed, tightening the robe around her before pulling the door open. Nathan stood there, impeccably dressed as always, holding a tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a plate of croissants. "Room service?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "I wanted to make sure you were up," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The wedding is in a few hours." She took one of the cups, inhaling the rich aroma. "And you think I'd oversleep? I don't strike you as the irresponsible type?" Nathan studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "I think you're unpredictable." She smirked over the rim of her cup. "Good. I'd hate to be boring." He set the tray down on the table and gestured toward the dress that had been delivered the night before. "Everything is ready. I'll have a car pick us up in an hour." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee before setting it down. "You still haven't told me much about her." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Olivia." He sat down across from her, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. "She was..." He hesitated, something flickering behind his eyes before he continued. She was exactly what my family wanted for me. Wealthy, polished, ambitious. Eleanor tilted her head. And you? Nathan let out a short laugh. I was a fool. I thought we had something real. But in the end, it was just business to her. A merger disguised as a marriage. Eleanor could hear the bitterness woven into his words. But more than that, she could hear something else. Something closer to disappointment than rage. And now she's marrying someone else? He nodded. Someone safer, more predictable. His jaw tightened. Someone her family approves of. Eleanor studied him carefully. So this is revenge. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and assessing. Does that bother you? She shrugged. Not my problem. I'm just here for the paycheck. Nathan leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze. Then why do I get the feeling you're enjoying this? Eleanor smirked but didn't answer. Instead, she stood, stretching her arms above her head before making her way toward the dress. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the weight of it, the luxury. I should get ready, she said lightly. Nathan watched her for a moment longer before nodding. I'll be waiting downstairs. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. As she slipped into the dress, something settled deep in her chest. A familiar weight. She had spent years trying to escape this world, but now, for the first time in a long time, she was stepping back into it. And she wasn't sure if that thrilled her or terrified her. The car ride to the wedding was quiet, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Eleanor sat beside Nathan in the sleek black car, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, studying her like she was another puzzle he had yet to solve. She kept her own expression neutral, staring out the window as the city blurred past. The dress he had chosen for her was flawless, deep emerald green, sculpted to her body in a way that made her look like she belonged in this world. It wasn't the first time she had worn something this expensive, but it was the first time in years. Nathan finally spoke. You're calm. She turned her head slightly, raising an eyebrow. Should I be nervous? Most people would be. His voice was even, controlled. You're about to walk into a room filled with people who will judge you before you even say a word. Eleanor let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Oh, Nathan. She looked at him then, a slow smile curving her lips. I've been judged my whole life. This is nothing new. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look away. And yet, you won't tell me why. She turned back to the window. Because it doesn't matter. The car slowed as they approached the grand estate where the wedding was taking place. Through the tinted glass, Eleanor could see the guests already gathered. Elegant men in tailored suits, women in gowns worth more than most people made in a year. Everything about it was painfully familiar. The driver pulled up to the entrance, and before she could react, Nathan reached for her hand. His grip was firm, steady, his skin warm against hers. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, just follow my lead. Eleanor tilted her head, considering him. Then with a smirk, she squeezed his hand lightly. Don't worry about me, Nathan. I know how to play the game. The door opened, and the moment they stepped out, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations faltered. Heads turned, curious gazes locking onto them as they made their way up the marble steps. Nathan didn't hesitate. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable as he led her inside. Eleanor matched his energy effortlessly, holding her head high, the years of surviving in high society coming back to her like second nature. The ballroom was exquisite. Vaulted ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and tables adorned with crystal and gold. But all Eleanor cared about was the woman at the center of it all, Olivia. She stood near the grand staircase, her white gown pristine, her golden hair swept into an effortless chignon. She was beautiful, the kind of beauty that had been carefully cultivated over years of privilege, and she was staring directly at them. Nathan's grip on Eleanor's waist tightened ever so slightly. "Here we go." Olivia's expression barely shifted as they approached, but Eleanor could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? "Nathan?" Olivia greeted, her voice smooth, polished. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Nathan's smile was sharp. "I wouldn't miss it." Olivia's gaze drifted to Eleanor, her perfectly painted lips curving slightly. "And you brought a guest. How unexpected." Eleanor didn't blink. She simply smiled, extending her hand. "Eleanor, it's a pleasure." Olivia hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking it. Her grip was light, her nails perfectly manicured. "Olivia." Her eyes flicked back to Nathan. "You always did have an eye for unique company." Nathan's expression didn't change, but Eleanor could feel the subtle shift in his body, a warning. Eleanor, however, was unfazed. She had dealt with women like Olivia before. She had been Olivia once. She tilted her head slightly. "And you always did enjoy making an impression." A flicker of something dark passed through Olivia's eyes, but before she could respond, a man stepped forward. "Ah, Nathan," the man said, his voice filled with that effortless confidence of old money. "Glad you could make it. Charles Montclair, the groom." Eleanor sized him up instantly. Handsome in that predictable kind of way. Wealthy. Safe. Exactly the kind of man Olivia would choose. Nathan extended a hand, shaking Charles's with just the right amount of force. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Charles said, before glancing at Eleanor with mild curiosity. "And you are?" Nathan's voice was smooth as silk. "Eleanor is my date." The way he said it left no room for argument, no explanation, no elaboration, just fact. Charles nodded politely, though Eleanor could see the questions forming in his mind. Olivia, on the other hand, wasn't done. "Nathan doesn't usually bring dates to events like this." Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes were sharp. "Tell me, Eleanor, how did you two meet?" Eleanor knew this was a test. She could feel Nathan's eyes on her, waiting. She smiled. "Oh, you know," she said airily, reaching for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "One of those chance encounters." Olivia arched a perfect eyebrow. "How romantic." Eleanor took a sip of her drink, savoring the bubbles. "Isn't it?" Olivia held her gaze for a long moment, then finally let out a soft laugh. "Well," she said, turning back to Nathan, "I do hope you enjoy the evening." Nathan's expression remained unreadable. "We will." As Olivia and Charles moved on to greet other guests, Eleanor exhaled quietly, setting her glass down. Nathan leaned in slightly. "Not bad," she smirked. "Oh, Nathan, you have no idea." Because Olivia might have thought she had won, but Eleanor had played this game before, and she never lost. The evening unfolded with effortless elegance, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Eleanor could feel the weight of Olivia's gaze lingering on her every so often, assessing, calculating. It didn't bother her. She was used to scrutiny, used to playing roles that made people underestimate her. But there was something about the way Olivia watched her that made Eleanor certain. Olivia didn't just see a woman on Nathan's arm. She saw something familiar, and that could be dangerous. Nathan led her through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting associates and exchanging polite pleasantries with people he probably couldn't stand. Eleanor played her part flawlessly, smiling at the right moments, offering small but insightful comments that made her seem just the right balance of charming and enigmatic. She knew how to command attention without demanding it, how to blend in while standing out. But it wasn't just Olivia who was curious about her. Damon Blackwood, one of the wealthiest investors in the city, had been watching her since she walked through the door. She had noticed him the moment they arrived, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 40s, with the kind of presence that made people stand a little straighter when he entered a room. And now, as Nathan stepped away to speak with an associate, Damon took his chance. "You carry yourself well," he said smoothly, appearing at her side. "That's rare these days." Eleanor turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze with mild amusement. "You say that as if elegance is a dying art." "It is." He studied her, the hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And yet, you seem to have mastered it. Tell me, Eleanor, where exactly did you learn that?" It was a test, a subtle probe into her past, wrapped in flattery. Damon wasn't just making conversation, he was digging. She smiled, sipping her champagne. "Observing people like you, I suppose. The powerful always have a way of teaching those who pay attention." Damon chuckled, clearly pleased by her answer. "Smart. But I wonder, how much of what you present is real?" Eleanor met his gaze, unflinching. "How much of what anyone presents in this room is real?" His smile widened just a fraction. But before he could respond, Nathan returned. "Damon," Nathan said smoothly, stepping beside Eleanor with effortless authority. "I see you've met Eleanor." "I have," Damon replied, his gaze flickering between them. "She's intriguing." Nathan rested a hand lightly on the small of Eleanor's back. It was an unconscious gesture, one that told Damon everything he needed to know. "That she is," Nathan said, his voice even, "which is why I think I'll keep her to myself tonight." Damon chuckled, lifting his glass. "Fair enough." As he walked away, Eleanor glanced up at Nathan. That was possessive. Nathan didn't look at her, but she could see the edge in his jaw. Damon doesn't make small talk unless he's interested in something. She smirked. "And you don't like when people are interested in me?" He finally looked at her then, his gaze dark and unreadable. "I don't like when people try to figure you out before I do." The way he said it sent a small, unexpected shiver down her spine. But before she could respond, Olivia's voice cut through the air. "It's time for the toast." A hush fell over the room as the guests turned their attention to the front, where Olivia and Charles stood near the grand staircase. Eleanor watched as Olivia raised her glass, the picture of effortless charm. "Tonight is not just about love," Olivia said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "It's about partnership. It's about finding the person who matches your ambition, who understands your vision, and who stands by your side as you build the life you deserve." There was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the room. Eleanor wasn't the only one who caught the message hidden in Olivia's words. It wasn't a toast to love. It was a toast to power. Nathan's expression didn't change, but Eleanor felt his posture tense beside her. Olivia's eyes found his across the room. And then, as if she had just noticed Eleanor for the first time, she smiled. "And of course," Olivia continued, lifting her glass slightly, "we are honored to have so many dear friends here tonight, some familiar and some new." There it was, a direct hit. Eleanor smiled. She had to admire the precision. As the guests raised their glasses and took their sips, Nathan turned to her. "She's trying to get under my skin," he murmured. Eleanor tilted her head. "Is it working?" Nathan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No." She smirked. "Good, because I think it's time we gave her something else to think about." Before he could respond, Eleanor took his hand and led him toward the dance floor. The orchestra began playing a slow, elegant waltz. Couples moved gracefully across the floor, the rhythm of the music filling the space with an almost dreamlike quality. Eleanor moved with ease, her body aligning perfectly with Nathan's as they stepped into the dance. "You're enjoying this," he murmured, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Are you not?" she countered. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I don't usually dance at events like this." "Then you should do it more often." Nathan studied her, his expression unreadable. "You really don't let anything faze you, do you?" She let out a soft laugh. "I've learned that if you don't let people see your weaknesses, they start to believe you don't have any." Something flickered in his eyes at that. Understanding, perhaps, or something deeper. Across the room, Olivia watched them, her smile still in place, but her grip on her champagne glass just a little too tight. Eleanor saw it, and she knew. She had just become Olivia's problem. And that was exactly what she wanted. As the night deepened, the tension in the air grew heavier. Olivia played the perfect hostess, laughing at the right moments, smiling at the right people. But Eleanor could see through the facade. Olivia was trying to figure her out, peeling back the layers, searching for a weakness. And Eleanor? She was enjoying every second of it. Nathan led her off the dance floor as the music faded into the background. His grip was firm, his posture composed, but there was something just beneath the surface, an unspoken thought weighing on him. "She's going to come after you," Nathan said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Eleanor smirked, glancing at him as they maneuvered through the sea of elegantly dressed guests. "Let her." He didn't return the smirk. If anything, his expression darkened. "You don't understand. Olivia doesn't like to lose, and right now, she's losing." Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Are you worried about me, Nathan?" His jaw tensed. "I don't trust her. She plays dirty." She tilted her head, studying him. "And you think I don't know how to handle people like her?" He let out a slow breath, raking a hand through his hair. "That's the problem, Eleanor. I think you do." But Olivia doesn't just want to get even. She wants to erase anything that challenges her control. You showing up here, standing beside me, that's a direct threat to her. Eleanor considered his words carefully. She knew people like Olivia. Women who thrived on power, who wielded influence like a weapon, who saw relationships not as emotional connections, but as strategic moves. Olivia had spent years building her life with the idea that Nathan would always be part of her orbit. even if he wasn't hers anymore. And now, in one evening, Eleanor had shattered that illusion. "Then we'll see how she plays," Eleanor finally said, her voice steady. Nathan exhaled through his nose, shaking his head as if she was making a mistake. "You don't get it. Olivia doesn't just manipulate people. She destroys them." Eleanor met his gaze without hesitation. "Nathan, I've already lost everything once before. Do you really think I'm afraid of someone like her?" For a second, he didn't say anything, just looked at her as if seeing her in a new light. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right," he murmured, "but just remember, if she comes for you, I won't stand on the sidelines." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver through Eleanor. She could handle Olivia on her own, but the idea of Nathan standing beside her, that was dangerous. Because the more time she spent with him, the more she realized she wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was starting to care. Before she could respond, a waiter discreetly approached Nathan, murmuring something in his ear. Nathan's expression shifted, his attention snapping away from her. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Stay here. I need to handle something." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Handle what?" Nathan hesitated for a fraction of a second, and that was all the confirmation she needed. Whatever it was, it involved Olivia. "Stay here," he repeated, his tone softer this time. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor watched him go, a strange unease settling in her chest. She didn't like being left out of things, and she certainly didn't like the idea of Nathan walking into whatever trap Olivia was setting without knowing the full picture. A moment later, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Quite the entrance you made tonight. You—" Eleanor turned to find Olivia standing a few feet away, a champagne glass in hand, her smile as sharp as ever. "Well," Eleanor said, matching her tone with a smile of her own, "I do enjoy making an impression." Olivia tilted her head slightly. "That much is obvious." She took a delicate sip of her drink before lowering the glass, her eyes calculating. "Nathan isn't the kind of man to bring just anyone to a night like this." Eleanor didn't flinch. "And yet here I am." Olivia's smile tightened, just a little. "Yes, here you are." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. The unspoken words, the challenge in their gazes. It was a game, and they both knew it. "I have to admit," Olivia continued, "I did some checking. You're quite the mystery, Eleanor." Eleanor felt a flicker of amusement. "Am I?" Olivia's expression didn't change, but there was a dangerous edge to it now. No history, no records, nothing before a few years ago. That's rare, almost as if you didn't exist before then. Eleanor's pulse remained steady. She had expected this. Olivia was powerful, resourceful, and relentless. She wouldn't have let the night end without finding a way to regain control. "So tell me," Olivia said, her voice dipping into something silkier, more deliberate. "Who are you really?" Eleanor met her gaze head on. "Who do you think I am?" Olivia let out a soft laugh. "I think you're playing a very dangerous game." Eleanor took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough that only Olivia could hear. "And I think you're afraid you're going to lose." For the first time all evening, Olivia's mask slipped. It was only for a second, a brief flicker of irritation, of something deeper, something unsettled, but Eleanor saw it. And that was all she needed. Olivia exhaled through her nose, recovering quickly. "Well," she said, taking a step back, "I suppose we'll see how this plays out, won't we?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, we will." Olivia held her gaze for a moment longer, before turning and walking away, disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor let out a slow breath, rolling her shoulders. The conversation had gone exactly as she expected, but that didn't mean she was in the clear. Olivia was going to dig deeper, and Eleanor had no intention of making it easy for her. Now, she just had to figure out what Nathan was doing. Because if there was one thing she knew for certain, it was that Olivia wasn't done yet. Eleanor knew better than to wait idly. Whatever Nathan was handling, it involved Olivia, and that meant it wasn't something she could afford to ignore. She scanned the ballroom, her eyes searching for him amidst the glittering crowd. The energy of the event carried on as if nothing was happening, but she could sense the undercurrent of something shifting beneath the surface. Olivia wouldn't just let her presence go unanswered. Stepping away from the main hall, Eleanor moved toward the side corridors where fewer guests lingered. The quiet hum of voices faded, replaced by the sound of distant footsteps. She kept walking, her heels tapping against the marble floor, until she caught sight of Nathan standing near an open doorway. His back was turned to her, his posture tense. Across from him stood Olivia, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. Eleanor knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but she wasn't the kind of woman to walk away from something important. "You didn't think I'd figure it out, did you?" Olivia's voice was low but sharp. "That you could parade her around and I wouldn't look into it?" Nathan exhaled, his hands in his pockets. "And what exactly have you figured out, Olivia?" Eleanor could hear the barely restrained amusement in his voice, but Olivia wasn't playing. "She's not who she says she is," Olivia said coolly. "No history, no records. That doesn't just happen by accident." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain still. Nathan tilted his head slightly. "And? Maybe I don't care who she was before." Olivia let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, Nathan, always so reckless. Do you even know what she's hiding?" There was a pause. Eleanor could feel the weight of Olivia's words settling between them, hanging like a blade waiting to drop. "I know enough," Nathan said finally. Eleanor's breath caught. That was a lie. He didn't know. Not the full truth. And yet, he was defending her anyway. Olivia's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." Nathan's posture didn't shift. "You lost the right to warn me about mistakes a long time ago, Olivia." For the first time, Olivia's composure wavered. Her fingers curled slightly against her arm. "You really think this is about us?" she asked, voice tight. "This isn't about me being jealous, Nathan. It's about the fact that you don't know who you've let into your life." Nathan's gaze remained steady. "And you do?" Olivia hesitated just for a second, and Eleanor knew. She didn't have all the answers. Not yet. "I will," Olivia said, recovering quickly. "And when I do, you're going to regret this." Nathan didn't react. "Enjoy the rest of your night, Olivia." He turned away from her, walking toward the corridor that led back to the ballroom. Olivia remained frozen for a moment before shaking her head, forcing her usual smile back into place as she stepped out into the crowd. Eleanor stayed hidden in the shadows, her heart still pounding. Olivia wasn't going to stop. She had too much pride, too much control at stake. But what worried Eleanor more was Nathan. He was standing by her side, defending her, even when he didn't know everything. And sooner or later, he was going to demand answers. Eleanor took a deep breath, bracing herself, because when that moment came, she had no idea if he would still look at her the same way. Eleanor stepped back into the ballroom, her mind racing. The weight of Olivia's words still lingered, pressing against her chest like a vice. Nathan had defended her, but for how much longer? He had already sensed that she was keeping secrets. Eventually, he would demand the truth. And when that moment came, she wasn't sure if she was ready. She forced herself to move through the crowd, keeping her expression calm despite the storm raging inside her. The elegant guests continued their conversations, laughing, sipping champagne, completely unaware of the battle that had just taken place in the shadows. Then she spotted Nathan. He was standing by the bar, his shoulders relaxed, but his gaze distant. He was thinking, calculating. Eleanor knew she should turn away, buy herself more time, but her feet carried her toward him before she could stop herself. Nathan looked up as she approached, his eyes sharpening. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, as if he had been waiting for her to come to him. "Enjoying the party?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Nathan studied her for a beat, too long, before responding. "Not particularly." She smiled, tilting her head. "That's a shame. You usually enjoy playing these social games." His lips quirked, but his eyes didn't soften. "Some games aren't as entertaining when you don't know all the rules." Eleanor's stomach tightened, but she kept her composure. Nathan set his drink down. "Come with me." She hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere quieter." She wanted to refuse, to delay whatever conversation he was about to initiate, but she knew it was pointless. So she nodded. Nathan led her through the ballroom, past the grand staircase, and out onto a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. The cool night air brushed against her skin, bringing with it the scent of rain in the distance. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nathan turned to her. "Olivia's looking into you." Eleanor met his gaze, unreadable. "I know." He exhaled slowly, stepping closer. "I defended you." Her breath caught. "I know." Nathan studied her carefully. "Should I have?" The question hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Eleanor could feel the truth clawing at her throat, begging to be released. But fear held her back. The fear of seeing disappointment in his eyes, of losing the fragile trust they had built. "I never asked you to," she said softly. Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "What do you want me to say, Nathan?" "The truth." She looked away, gripping the edge of the balcony. "The truth isn't simple." "It never is," he said quietly, "but I need to hear it anyway." Eleanor closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but laced with something raw. "My name isn't Eleanor," she admitted. "At least, not anymore." Nathan's expression didn't change, but she could see the shift in his posture, the way he subtly braced himself. She continued, forcing the words out before she could lose her nerve. "My real name is Helena Wright." Nathan stilled. "Eleanor, Helena," let out a shaky breath. "I used to be someone in this world. My family was well known. My father, a respected businessman. But he trusted the wrong people. He got involved in deals he didn't understand, with people he shouldn't have crossed. And when it all fell apart, so did everything else." Nathan's silence was suffocating, but she pressed on. We lost everything. Our home, our reputation. My father, he didn't survive it. She swallowed against the ache in her chest. And my mother, she couldn't handle it either. I was left alone, with nothing but a name that no longer held any weight. Nathan's hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. So I disappeared. I erased myself. I became Eleanor, and I learned how to survive. She met his gaze, daring him to judge her. That's the truth. Nathan didn't speak for a long moment. The city lights cast sharp shadows across his face, making it impossible for her to read his expression. Finally, he exhaled. And Olivia? Helena's stomach twisted. She was involved. Nathan's head snapped up. She wasn't the mastermind, Helena clarified, but she played a part. She knew what was happening. She benefited from it, and she didn't care about the consequences. Nathan's jaw tightened. So this isn't just about you reclaiming your place. It's about revenge. Helena looked away. Wouldn't you want the same? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I need to know one thing. She turned back to him. Was I part of your plan? He asked. The question cut deeper than she expected. Helena hesitated, then shook her head. No. Nathan studied her, searching for any sign of deception. She stepped closer. I didn't expect you, Nathan. I didn't plan for you. Her voice softened. But you were the only one who ever looked at me and didn't see a pawn. Something shifted in his gaze, something she couldn't quite name. Then, without warning, he reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek. And what do you see when you look at me? Helena's heart pounded. She knew what he was asking, and she knew she couldn't lie. So she whispered, someone I don't want to lose. Nathan inhaled sharply, his hand lingering against her skin. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something undeniable. But before either of them could close the distance, before they could step over the line they had been towing for weeks, the balcony door swung open. A voice interrupted the moment. Nathan. They turned to see Damon standing there, his expression tense. Nathan straightened, his fingers slipping away from her skin. What is it? Damon hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Helena before settling back on Nathan. It's Olivia, he said. She just made her next move. Nathan felt a sharp tension coil in his chest as Damon's words sank in. He turned to face him fully, his expression hardening. What did she do? Damon glanced at Helena, then back at Nathan, hesitant. Whatever Olivia's move was, it was big. Helena straightened beside Nathan, her features unreadable, but he could sense the shift in her posture, bracing herself for whatever storm was about to hit. She went public, Damon finally said. Every major media outlet has it now. Articles, interviews, the whole scandal. Olivia spun the story to make it look like Helena was a con artist who faked her identity to manipulate you. Nathan's fists clenched, anger rising in his throat like bile. She's making it look like Helena only resurfaced now to ruin her life out of jealousy, Damon continued. She's even implying that you're a victim in all of this, that she's concerned you were tricked by someone pretending to be someone they're not. Helena let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Of course she did. Nathan turned to her, his jaw tight. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, she said, her voice cool but laced with an undertone of something darker. This is what Olivia does. She rewrites the narrative to make herself look like the victim. She exhaled slowly. I just didn't expect her to do it this fast. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his mind already working through the implications. This wasn't just a hit on Helena. It was an attack on both of them. Olivia was making sure that even if Helena had any chance of reclaiming her life, she would do it with the entire world labeling her a liar and a fraud. She thinks this will scare us, Helena murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Damen crossed his arms. She doesn't just think, Helena. She knows how public perception works. If she gets ahead of the story, people will believe her before you even have a chance to defend yourself. Nathan shook his head. She's underestimating us. Helena met his gaze, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. Are you sure? He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. I don't scare easily, Helena, and I sure as hell don't let people manipulate me. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Helena let out a slow breath and nodded. Then we fight back. Damen cleared his throat. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Because Olivia's already got the media on her side. Nathan turned to him. Then we take her power away. Damen raised an eyebrow. And what does that mean? It means we stop letting her control the story. Nathan's mind was racing, already calculating the next steps. Helena, are you ready to go public? Helena hesitated, her fingers twitching at her sides. Go public how? Your name. Your story. Everything, Nathan said. We put you in front of the world before Olivia can bury you under her lies. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Nathan could see the war happening inside her, the urge to fight, but also the exhaustion of having to defend herself over and over again. Then she squared her shoulders. I'm ready. Nathan nodded. Then let's get to work. The next morning, the world woke up to a different story than the one Olivia had tried to sell. Nathan had made sure of it. A press conference had been arranged, and when Helena Wright, no longer Eleanor, no longer a nameless ghost, stepped up to the podium, the entire city was watching. Nathan stood by her side, silent but unwavering. Helena took a steady breath before speaking. My name is Helena Wright, she began, her voice strong and clear. And for the past few years, I have been forced to live in the shadows of a lie. She told the truth, the real truth, about her father's downfall, about the betrayal that cost her everything, and about how Olivia had played a role in ensuring her family never recovered. She didn't paint herself as a victim. She didn't beg for sympathy. She simply laid the truth bare. When the reporters started shouting questions, she answered each one with unwavering poise. And when they asked about Nathan, about whether she had deceived him, she turned to look at him. Nathan met her gaze and without hesitation reached for her hand. She didn't deceive me, he said, his voice steady. I knew who she was, and I stand by her. A flash of cameras, the world watching. And then, just like that, the tide shifted. The next day, the headlines told a different story. The fall of Olivia Harrington, investigation into her past reopens after shocking revelations. Iris turned outcast. Helena Wright speaks her truth and challenges the elite. Nathan Sterling takes a stand. I know who she is, and I stand by her. Olivia had expected to bury Helena. She never expected that Helena would come back stronger. And she never expected that Nathan wouldn't just stand beside her. He would fight for her. Later that evening, after the chaos had settled, Helena sat on the balcony of Nathan's penthouse, staring out at the city. Nathan stepped outside, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to her, then leaned against the railing beside her. "You were incredible today," he said. Helena let out a soft breath. "I don't know if it was enough." It was. She turned to look at him. "How do you know?" He gave her a small smile. "Because Olivia's scared." A pause. Then Helena smiled too. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one running. Helena sat in silence, letting the weight of the last 24 hours sink in. The world now knew the truth. Olivia had spent years weaving lies, building an empire on deception, and in a matter of hours, that empire had started to crumble. It should have felt like victory. Instead, all she felt was exhaustion. Nathan sat beside her, his presence steady. He hadn't left her side since the press conference, hadn't given her a chance to retreat into herself. He knew her well enough by now to anticipate that instinct. The instinct to run, to guard herself before the next blow could land. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, you know." His voice was quiet but firm. Helena turned her head to look at him, taking in the way the city lights reflected in his eyes. He had been her anchor through this storm, even when she hadn't wanted one, even when she had convinced herself she didn't need one. "I don't know how to be anything else," she admitted. Nathan leaned back against the railing, studying her. "You're not the same woman you were when I found you." She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "No, I'm not. And yet, you still don't see what I see." Helena looked at him then, really looked at him. There was no arrogance in his expression, no trace of the cold, calculated man he had been when they first met. Somewhere along the way, he had changed. And maybe she had too. "What do you see, Nathan?" she asked quietly. "I see someone who refuses to be broken," he said simply. "Someone who lost everything and still found a way to stand back up. And I see a woman who is so damn used to fighting that she doesn't know what to do when someone wants to fight for her." The words settled in her chest like a slow burn. She had spent so much of her life surviving that she had never stopped to consider what it meant to live. Nathan reached out then, his fingers brushing against hers. And for once, she didn't pull away. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting for her to ask that question. "Now," he said, "we finish this." Helena knew what he meant. Olivia wasn't done. A woman like that never accepted defeat so easily. She would find another way to twist the narrative, to salvage what she could of her reputation. But this time, Helena wasn't afraid. She had spent years living in Olivia's shadow, hiding from a past that had been stolen from her. Not anymore. She turned to face Nathan fully, determination setting in. "Then let's end it." The next morning, Helena and Nathan arrived at the offices of one of the most powerful legal teams in the city. If Olivia wanted a fight, she was about to get one. They spent the entire day reviewing documents, gathering evidence, and preparing statements. Helena had thought that reliving her father's downfall, revisiting the moments that had shattered her world, would be unbearable. But with every piece of evidence they collected, every undeniable truth they put together, she felt lighter. Olivia had stolen everything from her once. Now she was taking it back. By the evening, their case was airtight. Legal proceedings had been initiated. The media had already started shifting, questioning Olivia's narrative. Investors were pulling out. Business associates were distancing themselves. Olivia was losing. Helena should have felt satisfaction. Instead, all she felt was relief. As she and Nathan stepped out of the building, the cool night air washing over them, she finally allowed herself to breathe. "It's done," she murmured. Nathan studied her carefully. "Are you?" She frowned slightly. "Am I what?" "Done," he said. "When this is over, when Olivia has nothing left, what happens then?" Helena hadn't let herself think about that. For so long, her life had been defined by the battle, by the fight to reclaim what was taken from her. What did life look like when she wasn't fighting anymore? She looked up at Nathan, searching for an answer in his eyes. And then she realized she already knew. It wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about building something new. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to find out." Nathan smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled back. A week later, Olivia Harrington was formally indicted for fraud and financial crimes. The final blow came swiftly. Every carefully constructed lie she had spun unraveled. Every secret she had buried rose to the surface. She had spent her entire life manipulating people, controlling the narrative. But in the end, the truth had been her downfall. Helena watched the news unfold from Nathan's penthouse. She should have felt vindicated. Maybe she did. But more than anything, she felt free. Nathan walked in, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. He handed one to her, then sat beside her, watching the screen as Olivia's former associates distanced themselves from her, as her legal team scrambled for damage control. "To the truth," he said, raising his glass. Helena hesitated for a moment, then clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings," she corrected. Nathan studied her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "Helena," she turned to him, the sound of her real name on his lips, sending warmth through her chest. "I have something for you." She raised an eyebrow. "Another deal?" He smirked. "Not exactly." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Helena unfolded it carefully, her breath catching as she read the contents. A deed to a small art studio. Her hands trembled slightly. "Nathan, I remember what you said," he said quietly. "About how you used to paint, how it made you feel free." He shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Figured it was time you had something of your own again." Helena looked at him, emotion thick in her throat. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said simply. For the first time in her life, someone had given her something without expecting anything in return. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to fight for her place. She set the envelope aside and reached for his hand. "Nathan," his gaze darkened slightly, his fingers tightening around hers. "I think," she said softly, "I'm ready to stop running." Something shifted between them, something inevitable. Nathan reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Then stay." And this time, she did. The story of Helena and Nathan is more than just a tale of revenge, redemption, and unexpected love. It is a story about transformation, about the power of resilience, and about the choices we make when life gives us a second chance. Through Helena's journey, we see the raw, unfiltered reality of loss, betrayal, and survival. But more importantly, we see the strength it takes to reclaim what was stolen. Not just material wealth, but dignity, purpose, and the right to dream again. At its core, this story reminds us that our past does not define us. Helena had spent years believing that her identity was tied to the tragedy of her father's downfall, that she was nothing more than the remnants of a ruined legacy. But in the end, she realized that she was not just a victim of Olivia's schemes. She was more than the suffering she had endured. She was a fighter, a creator, and ultimately, a woman who refused to be erased. Nathan, too, had his own transformation. When we first met him, he was a man consumed by power and pride, a man who saw relationships as transactions and people as assets. But through Helena, he learned that real strength is not measured in wealth or influence, but in the ability to change, to admit fault, to stand by someone not because they serve a purpose, but simply because they matter. One of the most powerful lessons from this story is the idea that true justice comes not from revenge, but from truth. Helena had every reason to seek revenge against Olivia. After all, Olivia had destroyed her family, stolen her future, and left her with nothing. But Helena's greatest victory was not in Olivia's downfall. It was in Helena reclaiming her own life. She didn't just expose Olivia's crimes. She rebuilt herself into someone who could stand on her own. The best revenge was not destruction, but success. This lesson applies to all of us. There will always be people who try to bring us down, who betray us, who take advantage of our kindness or our trust. It is easy to be consumed by anger, to believe that our only path forward is to strike back. But this story reminds us that the best way to win is not to destroy others. It is to rise above them, to show them and the world that they did not break us. Another powerful takeaway is the importance of choosing the right people to stand by our side. Helena had spent years thinking she had to do everything alone, that trusting others would only lead to disappointment. But in the end, she realized that while we must be strong for ourselves, true strength also comes from allowing others to be there for us. Nathan was not perfect, but he showed up. He stood by her when it mattered, and in doing so, he proved that love is not just about grand gestures. It is about consistency, about being present in the moments when it would be easier to walk away. Helena and Nathan's love story is not a typical fairy tale. It did not begin with love at first sight or effortless attraction. It was built slowly, through challenges, through arguments, through moments of unexpected understanding. This is perhaps the most inspiring aspect of their relationship. Love is not always about instant perfection. Sometimes it is about two imperfect people choosing to grow together, to challenge each other, and to become better, not just for themselves, but for each other. And finally, this story teaches us that no matter how dark our past may be, we always have the power to write a new future. Helena could have let her past define her. She could have let her pain turn her into someone bitter, someone incapable of love or trust. But she didn't. She chose to move forward. She chose to dream again. So, what does this story mean for us? It means that we too have the power to redefine our lives. No matter where we come from, no matter what we have lost, we are not bound by our past. We are not just the mistakes we have made or the pain we have suffered. We are the choices we make today. It means that strength is not about never falling. It is about always getting back up. It means that the right people will see us for who we are, not for who we used to be. And it means that love, in its truest form, is not about possession or control. It is about growth. It is about choosing each other, every single day. Not because we have to, but because we want to. As we close this chapter, ask yourself, who do you want to become? What future do you want to create? And most importantly, what will you do today to take that first step forward? If you found inspiration in Helena and Nathan's journey, if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Stories that remind us of the power of resilience, love, and transformation. Leave a comment below. What was your favorite part of this story? What lessons resonated with you the most? And remember, every ending is just a new beginning. Keep believing, keep fighting, and never stop writing your own story.